Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Art Deco Society's UK webinar with Lucy Jane Santos. And we're really glad to have you here with us tonight. I'm Lorna, I'm the Art Deco Society's Membership Secretary and the Regional Rep Coordinator, and your webinar host for this evening. So I know we're all eagerly awaiting Lucy's talk on Art Deco London yesterday and today, but I've just got to go over a few house rules before we get started. So the first thing to say is that we now have auto-generated captions, which are available if you click the CC Live Transcription button on the bottom of your screen and then click Show Subtitles. Next is that this is a webinar format, which is different from a regular Zoom meeting in that you can only see the panelists, which are me and Lucy, but we can't see or hear you, and you can't see or hear each other. So please relax without having to worry that anybody can see you in your pajamas. We'll be following up the presentation today with a Q&A session with Lucy. So if you'd like to ask Lucy a question, please do put it in the Q&A session at any time, and which is just at the bottom of your screen, and I'll ask your questions at the end. You can also use the chat function if you'd like to share any comments or thoughts or raise any issues you have with the sound or the video. The talk is being recorded, and the link to YouTube will be sent out to all registered attendees over the next couple of days. This is a private link, so please don't share. As always, please be respectful and thoughtful with all your questions and comments. And that's it for the house rules. So we'll now move on to the part that you're patiently waiting for. So Lucy, welcome. Lucy specialises in the late 19th and early 20th century and is a freelance historian and consultant, uncovering the hidden stories of how science and technology have transformed daily life, especially when it comes to innovation in beauty practices. After completing her BA in Egyptian archaeology and an MA in Museum and Heritage Management, Lucy's worked for several private members' clubs and societies, including the Arts Club, the Authors Club, the Gourmet Society, and the International Wine and Food Society. Her debut book, Half-Lives, The Unlikely History of Radium, was shortlisted for the 2021 BSHS Hughes Prize, which recognises books that communicate the history of science in an engaging and accessible way to non-specialists. Her latest book, Chain Reactions, A Hopeful History of Uranium, was published in 2024. Lucy is currently working on Nobody's Perfect, on the set of Some Like It Hot, which is a fabulous film. I love it. Can't wait to read that one, which will be released in 2026. She is a founding member of the Art Deco Society, is our current chair, and she also writes about our enduring fascination for Art Deco at the Deco Echo. Lucy, over to you.
Hello, it's always so embarrassing when people list things. Even though I sent that to you, it's still embarrassing having to listen to it, isn't it? Right, let's get to the main thing. Yes, so we're going to be doing Art Deco London yesterday and today, and I'm just going to swing through a few of these. You've already heard about me, so I won't linger on this, but I will just give you the opportunity to look at my lovely book covers, if that was any tempting at any point. So let's move on. So this is what we're going to be doing today. So there are so many topics to cover and so many examples that I wasn't really sure how I should structure this talk at first. Couldn't do it chronologically because there's so much overlap, and we're, looking at a fairly small period of time anyway. So I decided to take inspiration from my collection of 20s and 30s guidebooks, which I do have a little image of here. And also they're next to me as well, so I could sort of wave them at general points during the talk. And I decided that I would do it, so we'd do sort of day in the life in London in the 20s and 30s, and we'd start at home and we'd end up in a bar. Now, I've been fairly heavy with the places that are still in existence in some form or other. And it's also worth just saying that we are going to cover a lot today. I think I've got about 120 slides, so they're going to go pretty quick. We're going to cover a lot. So I'd also just say at the start, this is being recorded. So if you do need to pop off or disappear at 8:30 on the dot, you'll get the YouTube link and you can come back to it. And also we're going to take questions at the end. So please do think of those questions. I can't see any questions or any chat while I'm giving the talk. Now, the bits that we can probably get through fairly quickly at the beginning, because I think I'm amongst friends here. I think I'm amongst people who know a fair bit about Art Deco. But I did think it was worth having a little word about what Art Deco is, especially in a British context, especially in a London context. And it is always difficult to know what level to pitch these things at, but I am going to assume a fairly good knowledge. So we're just going to flick through these slides. So, in brief, Art Deco. This is something, well, Art Deco, it comes to be known as Art Deco later, but we see even before World War I, the roots of the style. There's an emphasis on newness, moving away from what's been done before, all of that wonderful stuff. We have designers like Paul Poiret, the early works of Erta. We've got the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb and the explosion of Egyptomania. Now, all of these have an influence on the design and the development of Art Deco and vice versa as well. The term Art Deco is derived from the famous 1925 International Exposition. This is the centenary of the Art Deco's exposition this year. This was organised by the Society of Decorative Arts, April to October 1925 in Paris. And it's here that we can really see the coming together of all of these wonderful styles, which at the time was being called style moderne. It was being presented to the world through architecture, designers, engineers, and eventually did spread all across the world, with different nations adapting it to their style. Art Deco really starts becoming looked down on in the 40s and 50s. We see a resurgence in the 60s, which started with an interest in all things 20s and 30s before solidifying into an Art Deco revival. And this was the time where that term Art Deco became popularized. First by an exhibition in 1966 in Paris that celebrated the year 1925. We also have Bonnie and Clyde being released in 1967. And that Bonnie and Clyde style certainly catches on. In 1968, we have Bevis Hillier's Art Deco book, which really popularizes the term. And incidentally, he is a patron of the Art Deco Society and has some absolutely fascinating stories about that time. There's a little quote here. I won't, well, actually, it's so big, I might probably better to run through it. An assertively modern style developing in the 1920s and reaching its high point in the 30s. It drew inspiration from various sources. It ran to symmetry rather than asymmetry and to the rectilinear instead of the curvilinear. Gosh, those words are hard, isn't it? It responded to the demands of the machine and of new materials such as plastics. This is all good, and I've highlighted a few words, including that mass production. Again, we're just going to quickly pop through these. It's often being cited as the first style or trend that left an indelible mark on all aspects of design, many of which we're going to see in the British context tonight, but specifically the architecture. It's harder to pin down exactly what it is, but words keep coming up: streamlined, geometrical, curved, patterns, sunburst, triangles, and those jagged pointed edges inspired by skyscrapers. Materials like stainless steel and mirrors, infused with a multitude of contrasting elements, colours, brights and deep yellows, all of these lovely things. I wanted to just finish off this section of the talk by just talking about modern Art Deco, because we're going to come back to that right at the end. Art Deco is still a style to be reckoned with, and this is what happens when you do a Google search for Art Deco at the moment. This is all the things. So we see this combination of old Art Deco, but new variations of it as well. Now, of course, tonight we're going to be talking about Art Deco London, but it's also worth noting there are other places in Britain. The Art Deco Society is a UK society after all. So here we can see the magnificent Burr Island in the southwest of England, the Pyramid Theatre in Sale, the George Dock Ventilation Control Station in Liverpool. And of course, Liverpool is where we'll be celebrating the centenary of Art Deco in late March of this year. Now, the period we're talking about is the decades after the First World War, of course, and before the Second, the time that we know as the interwar period. It's a time when the global presence of Britain, its empire, is under threat. Influenza has killed 250,000 people in Britain and 40 million people worldwide. It's a time of mass unemployment and conflict between workers and bosses. There's high prices, poor housing, and widespread poverty, all exacerbated by Black Tuesday, 29th of October, 1929, when when stock prices on Wall Street collapsed, and by 1931, England as well was in crisis. Although London, it should be noted, was rather more protected from the worst of that depression than other parts of the country. Now, with all that, there was still extreme wealth, but even this is changing. So some of the new buildings were only possible because of the British aristocracy sold their large houses to private developers as they were unable to afford the costs any longer. Now, this clears up large amounts of space in order to build new buildings. One of the examples of this is Dorchester House on Park Lane, which had been, Dorchester Hotel on Park Lane, which had been Dorchester House, also known as Hertford House, an 18th century building that was demolished in 1929 after being sold by the family to Sir Robert McAlpine, owner of the famous construction company. We see the Dorchester Hotel being built soon after, the first reinforced concrete hotel, ultra-modern and efficient, telephones in every room, draft-proof windows and soundproofed walls. It opened in 1931. Now, there was also growing jobs, being better paid, more disposable income. And of course, London is the capital city of Britain, with between 7 to 8 million people living there at the time. Up until 1925, it had actually been the largest city in the world, but had been overtaken by New York. So as I said, we're going to do a quick tour, a quick whiz around London. There are so many examples we could give, but I want to keep this fairly brief so we can get to more topics. So today we're going to wake up in our own bed in an unspecified area of Greater London, specifically in a suburb. The first London suburbs were being built by private investors during the 19th century, and by the end of the century, the London County Council had ordered more. There was even more in the late 1920s. The war years had caused a deficit of homes due to a lack of building, and many people's homes were very basic. They were unheated or only had an open coal fire. They lacked basic amenities like inside toilets and were frequently shared with mice and rats. Suburbs were either private developments, largely middle class, or council estates, which were for the poorer Londoners. These all expanded rapidly during the time, and by the end of the 1920s, London's size had increased threefold, with 2.7 million houses being built during the 1930s alone. We can see several distinct styles. The mock Tudor and the cottage style were the most popular, reflecting the taste for nostalgia for rural living. Suburban living led to a new rhythm of life for many, with the family main earner even travelling into the city centre for work, and the homemaker staying at home or travelling in for leisure. So I've put a few examples of houses, Art Deco or 20s, 30s houses at this point. There are so many examples of these new suburbs, so I could take all night looking at these alone, but let's go for a few. So private developments, we've got flats here. So there were a lot of these being built. Now I've seen figures that in the 5-year period, 1934 to 39, almost 60,000 flats were built by the private sector in London, in both inner and outer London. We have Ealing Village, an estate of 5 Art Deco blocks of flats developed 1934 to 36. There's a total of 128 in these 4-storey blocks. They were designed to be a slice of Hollywood in West London, with private tennis courts, outdoor pools, clubhouses, and expansive gardens. You can see that beautiful red and green motifs, the white render, and those crystal windows, those thin steel framed windows that is still so desirable, at least visually. In Balham in South London, we have Duquesne Court. Now, this opened with 676 apartments. It was estimated at the time to be the largest privately owned block of flats in Europe. And opened in 1937. So we can see here some photos of the entrance hall of Duquesne Court. Now, this was a very popular place to live for, especially for music hall stars in the 30s and 40s. They came with central heating, constant hot water, and radios fitted into each apartment. The 7th floor had a social club, a restaurant bar, poker room, and there was also a rooftop garden. I mean, I'm going to say this many times tonight, but these are really gorgeous spaces, aren't they? Now, unfortunately, that restaurant and bar space was actually destroyed by fire in the 1940s. We can see an image of it here, and it wasn't replaced. Now, Duquesne Court, the buildings we've seen, Ealing Village, Duquesne Court, they are still in existence. Now, throughout the course of the talk, I will be mostly, as I said, talking about places that are still in existence. I won't always put a photo of what they look like now. they're largely, they look, at least from outside, pretty much like they did before. And for me, it's less interesting to see just standing outside. But if you're into that, there are still plenty of standing outside type pictures that you're going to see tonight. Now we also have Abbots Hall Avenue, Arnos Grove, which is in North London, a group of 9 Art Deco style houses developed by Frank Woodward and Charles Woodward. They were built in brick and then rendered in white, and the development was completed between 1936 and 1939. And again, this is one of those pictures where we can see a relatively recent image and then what it looked like in the past, not too dissimilar. So we also see a lot of mass-produced houses at this point, many of which were built in pairs, i.e. semi-detached. Now this was rather than terraced houses, which had been previously popular. These are characterised by red brick, although sometimes these would be rendered. They would be pebble-dashed and half-timbered with red clay tile roofs. They often had a garage for the newly popular car. And this is the next section of our talk, because we're going to think about travelling in London during the 20s, 30s, the Art Deco period. Now, before the 1870s, individual transport was achieved through having a horse and carriage or using hansom cabs. These were clearly very expensive and out of the reach of most people, and even bicycles were not mass-produced until the end of the 19th century. So before, you simply lived within walking distance of where you worked. Now, as I said, people in the 20s and 30s, they're moving away from the city centres, they're moving into the suburbs, and with that we get a new rhythm of life. There was also the need to get to the city for work. Public transport, which we'll talk about a little bit later, was really important for the suburban development, but so was the advent of the modern car, or even the motor car. Sorry, notes failed there. Now we see a rapid rise in the number of motor cars during the 20s. In 1920, there was around about 200,000 cars on the road in Britain, and by 1939, about 2 million. So this is a rapid increase. You could get a small car for about £200, £300 in the 1920s, but this price soon started dropping rapidly as production became increasingly mechanised. The mass market was dominated by Morris, Austin, and Ford, with the Austin 7 being particularly popular in that mass market demographic. At the very luxury end, we have things like, sometimes I just can't resist putting in nice pictures. We have the Rolls-Royce Phantom. This was produced in 1925 originally, with different series of them, with the Phantom 3 being introduced in 1936. Now, the rise of the private ownership of motor cars changes everything. It leads to a whole new industry to cater for these motorists, in which you needed showrooms, garages, car parks, and filling stations. Art Deco is crucial for this. It's a perfect design choice. It was associated with glamour and speed, and we start seeing Art Deco style car showrooms even being springing up everywhere, and particularly around the suburbs of London. These are often next to the newly built roads around those areas, the Great West Road, the Western Avenue, and the Great Cambridge Road. Now here we see Stewart and Arden Company's showrooms. They, as you might be able to tell from the drawing, sell Morris cars. Now, the building was designed by Stuart Cameron Kirby. It was sleek, modern, and exciting, fitted out with chromium, steel, and glass. I mean, just again, beautiful, beautiful stuff. We also have a word I really struggle to say, actually, Wolseley. That's right. 160 Piccadilly, the Wolseley Motor Limited showroom, designed by William Curtis Green, an absolutely gorgeous space, but the business didn't do too well. The firm went into bankruptcy and the building was taken over by Barclays Bank in 1926. The original showroom had opened in 1921. We also have the Daimler Hire Company. This building that was housed in this building opened in 1931 in Herbrand Street. The designers, Wallace Gilbert and Partners. Now, originally stored Daimler-owned cars and up to 500 privately owned cars. It is an Art Deco treasure in central London. We see those rectangular windows, beautiful emerald tiles. It had an electrically operated pressure washer, a waiting room, and hired out chauffeur-driven cars. Now, this is a photo I took a couple of years ago. I don't think McCann is still there actually, but I can't quite remember who's in that building there now. But it does still stand, and that's the important thing. Now, if you didn't have your own transport, then you would rely on public transport, which opened up greatly in the late 19th century and early 20th century in London. It was cheap and convenient and greatly expanded the freedom of people, especially the working classes who largely couldn't afford to buy and run a car. There was a largely electrified tram network, and then electric buses became popular after the war. There's lots of different companies offering these services. It's worth noting that this is not a tram. This is an image is not from the period, but the artist Robin Pinnock. But I felt that it was a beautiful image to show for this one. We also see the development of trains, especially in the suburban areas. In South London, we see some particularly beautiful examples of Art Deco train station buildings, largely designed by James Rob Scott. This line leaves from Waterloo and it's the Southwest main line towards Southampton. It's the commuter belt, but also carrying on to Southampton. This is where people embarked on the ocean liners to head across the Atlantic. This is another word I struggle with. Surbiton, which was even worse when I actually lived there. Surbiton Railway Station, which opened in 1937, reinforced concrete with a flat roof. And you can see this booking hall as well, you know, very grand, very well lit. Absolutely beautiful windows. Of course, that still stands today, as is the next one, still on that line, not very far away, Richmond upon Thames. Again, James Rob Scott, encased in this beautiful Portland stone. You can also see an image here of the station bar, which was built at the same time. So this is 1937. We also see at the same time developments in the London Underground, especially the Metropolitan line, which runs through the suburbs known as Metroland. Art Deco was an essential component of this development and was also used to build corporate identity. The architect Charles Holden was commissioned to design at 7 stations as part of the extension of the Northern Line between Clapham Common and Morden. These are typified by double-heighted ticket halls, Portland stone frontages, and these beautiful large windows. Absolute just beacons of modernity. So this is an image of Tooting Bec Station, which started life off as Trinity Road Station. Again, we could spend hours just looking at gorgeous underground stations. So I'm trying not to do that, although that is my impulse. We've got Arnos Grove here, 1932, 1933. Now, Holden was also asked to design the headquarters for the London Underground, although at the time it was the Underground Electric Railway Company of London, and then from 1933, London Transport. This is 55 Broadway, St James's Park. It reaches up to 14 stories and was known as London's first skyscraper. It's a Grade 1 listed complex and was sold by TfL recently in order to reduce its office administration costs and to increase revenue. It was sold for a reported £120 million. Now, after that, Holden was commissioned to design Senate House for the University of London, which is in Bloomsbury. This was, again, one of the first skyscraper buildings in London. This one is 19 stories high, and you can really get a sense of the scale of it and also what was around it at this time, from this aerial image from 1938. I've been very subtle with my purple arrow there, but you know, I think even without that, you would be able to see that that is Senate House. Now, Senate House was used by the Ministry of Information during World War II and was obviously used as the inspiration for the Ministry of Truth in George Orwell's 1984. Now, I've said before about Grade 2 or listed statuses. This is a Grade 2. This was given a Grade 2 listed status. The listed status here means that it was designated as a building of architectural or historical interest and may not be demolished, extended, or altered without special permission. So let's get back to our day. Now, well, we could, of course, use public transport to go to work, which we're going to look at work in a little bit. There was also the option to use it to go into town for shopping. London Underground had advertised their services for all kinds of things, but there was a special emphasis on shopping, and we see some amazing posters because of it. You see a couple of ones, a few of them here. The last one is Dora Batty from 1925. So the interwar period also sees a change in shopping habits, a growth of the mass consumer market. People had more disposable income, goods become cheaper, largely due to changes in production and retailing. The Never Never was introduced, the hire purchase. There were simply more things and more shops to buy them in. This is the point where household names like Woolworths, Sainsbury's, Boots, Marks and Spencer's all expanded. So I wanted to look at a few shops that really embraced that Art Deco style, and we're going to start off with Marks and Spencer's. Started in 1884 in Leeds in the north of England, and by the early 1920s they had expanded a lot. They were worried about their competitors, so they went to the US to study retail practice in chain stores. In the late 1920s, they opened their first branch in the West End, Michael House on Oxford Street near Marble Arch. This was built 1929 to 1930. By the early 1930s, the company had built 129 stores, or new stores, and extended many more. And by the beginning of the Second World War, they had 230 stores across the country. But by far, in my opinion, the most impressive Art Deco shop that they had was also on Oxford Street, which opened in 1938. Its sleek black granite facade. We've got the crystal windows as well. Now you can see the black and white images from 1938, and then I've put a more modern image next to it. So we can also see that it's been expanded over the years. And again, now this is a Grade 2 listed building. It'd been built on the site that had been the Pantheon, a high-class assembly room built in the late 18th century, and therefore known as the Pantheon as well. Inside was marble and gilded bronze display cases. It was described as being designed and equipped on lavish lines, more like a department store than a chain store. And in fact, it had sumptuous facilities that set it apart. There was a ladies' writing room and a restroom. The main retail departments were food, clothing, millinery, footwear, and household goods. It also had a cafe at the back that was based on Wanamaker's in Philadelphia's, which I still have not actually been able to find an image of. This is one of the things I will always say. If any of you find images of these things, just send them to me. I'd love to see them. Another store in the West End is Simpson's in Piccadilly. It's an upmarket store for men. The architect behind it was very much, the influence behind it is very much American Deco streamline. The architect Joseph Emberton, and it opened in 1936. We can see some interiors here. We see the walnut veneered lift, and here is an image of the men's outfit department. Now, while Simpson's closed in the 1990s, the building is still there, and it's now a bookshop, part of the Waterstones chain. On the 5th floor, they've got a great bar with views over London. And don't worry, we will get at the end to all the places where you can drink in London with these more Art Deco styles. Now, with all of these categories, there are plenty more that we could talk about, and I'm sorry if I'm not talking about your favourite Art Deco buildings. We are lucky in London, there are so many of them. I just wanted to end the section by looking at two department stores next to each other on Kensington High Street, Barker's, which was founded in 1870, and Derry and Tom's, which was founded in 1860. The two companies had essentially merged when John Barker and company bought out their neighbours, competitors Derry and Tom in 1920. And then they decided to build two stores built in this beautiful Art Deco style. And in the new Derry and Tom's, we see many of those gorgeous Art Deco characteristics and materials, like the black marble and onyx of these wonderful, wonderful elevators. We also see some wonderful metal work with figures outside, with figures representing signs of the zodiac. Now, just like Marks and Spencer's, these companies were learning from the Americans, very successful retailers. And we can see the influence of those American department stores in the layout of these 1930s shops. You can see it's an inviting and an open shopping experience, and this is a contemporary illustration of the ground floor at Derry's. Now, back to our timeline. We're a little late this morning. We're a bit tired, I guess, but it's time to go to work. So I'm going to do a quick flick through several of the Art Deco office buildings. And we're going to start with newspaper offices. Newspapers in general in the 20s and 30s increased their content and increased their popularity. Editorial offices opened around the clock, with final editions being typeset late and printed overnight. There were three main daily newspapers at the time, and by 1937, the three biggest papers had a combined circulation of over 5 million copies daily. These were the Daily Mail, Daily Mirror, and Daily Express. Just got to flick. Now, the bulk of the newspapers were circulated around Fleet Street, and this is where you'll find this building, which housed the Daily Express newspaper until 1989. It's 120 Fleet Street, built 1930-1932 by the architects Ellis and Clark. They were commissioned by the owner of the Daily Express, Lord Beaverbrook even. And you can see the wonderful black vitrolite facade, chromium panels in both the contemporary and the modern image as well. Contemporary is the black and white one. It should be noted, however, that it has been reclad, so you're not seeing exactly the original, but pretty much similar. Now, inside, my notes here say wonderful. I'm aware I keep saying wonderful, but these are truly wonderful. So we see these wonderful chairs in the lobby with their wonderful, I do need to find another word, wonderful metal bases. The lobby is designed by Robert Atkinson. We also have two plaster reliefs, Britain and Empire by the sculptor Eric Aumonier, or Almonier. And we can see the placing of one of them in this rough sketch, which was drawn up by Robert Atkinson. And again, this is a modern day image of a conserved lobby. There was a significant amount of money put into conserving the lobby. We have in Carnaby Street, just off Carnaby Street, we have Ideal House, also known as Palladium House. So this is next to the Palladium Theatre. It's a 7-storey office block built in 1929 and extended in 1935. It was the headquarters of the National Radiator Company. And in fact, its architect, Raymond Hood, was the same one who had designed the American Radiator Building in New York, which was built in 1924. This was, as I was informed the other day, his only building in Europe. You can see beautifully polished black granite. We've got these beautiful golden touches as well, and black and gold are the company's colours. Today, the building accommodates restaurants on the ground floor and private accommodation above. Along the Strand, facing the river, we have Shell Mex House, or what was known as Shell Mex House. Another grand space, a 12-floor building. It was the headquarters of Shell Mex and BP, finished in 1931. However, it was built on the site of a much older complex, which had been the Hotel Cecil, which had been built between 1880 and 1886. Whilst the building was finished, while Shell Mex House was finished in 1931, during World War I, during World War II even, it was the Ministry of Supply's headquarters. It's now been converted into offices, many offices, and also has a gym on site as well. We also have our factories too. So we have Carreras Cigarette Factory in Camden, built in the late 1920s. It's a really good example of the influence of the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb and Egyptomania. We have these contemporary images of outside, but also on the day that the building was opened, which was the 3rd of November, 1928. Apparently, the organisers of the opening celebrations went all out for the ceremony. They had sand sprinkled outside in front of the building. The cast of Aida, the opera Aida, were performing outside to celebrate. And apparently, although I've not been able to find a photo of it, there was a chariot race formed by actors in full Egyptian pharaonic regalia. Now, at the time, it was the largest factory of its kind in the world, spread across 5 floors. It manufactured cigarettes, including the company's mainline Black Cat cigarettes. And as you can see, the black cats were guarding the entrance. There are so many Egyptianizing elements to this building. We've got sand-colored cement, Venetian glass, there's Egyptian symbols over the door. And this is a relatively recent image of it. It's a remarkable survival, not least because it had been stripped of all of its decorations in 1961, when it was converted from a factory into offices. However, the remarkable survival is because of a restoration project that took place in 1996 using the original building plans. And we see, with the addition of some replica cats outside, it still is a pretty magnificent building. There were also some very remarkable buildings along the Brentford Golden Mile, a stretch of road, the Great West Road. Now, many of these factories were erected by American manufacturers who needed a UK base rather to get around tariffs. These were prominently built on this main road. They were acted as advertisements. They showed how modern and exciting the companies were. And there was lots of companies. We have Gillette, McLean's toothpaste, Pyrene fire extinguishers, and Coty, the makeup brand Coty, which you can see here. This building was built in 1932, and its architects, like many of the buildings along this stretch of road, was again Wallace Gilbert and Partners. Now, interestingly here, whilst the front was Art Deco, behind it was a fully functioning factory. So more like an Art Deco, just facade, and then you get into the grit of the factory afterwards. Now, another Wallace Gilbert and Partners factory was the Firestone factory, built in the 1930s. You can see it under construction here. This is for the American Firestone Tire and Rubber Company. Again, beautiful. You can see so many of those Egyptianizing influences. Now, whilst I've tried to keep most of our examples to buildings that are still there tonight, factories are particularly vulnerable to time. It doesn't help that so many of them either fell victim to the Luftwaffe or post-war developers. But this is a particularly sad story because it closed in 1979 and was demolished just before the building was listed, i.e. protected, over a holiday weekend. And you can see an image of it being demolished here. I'm going to finish this talk by just looking quickly at this beauty. Another Wallace Gilbert and Partner commission. They were commissioned to create a factory on Western Avenue in Perivale. Again, this is another collaboration with an American company. The Hoover building, was built in a style that Thomas Wallace, the architect, named the fancy style. Again, we can see Egyptianized touches as well as a clear influence of the art of Central and North American India. This factory opened in 1933 and is still there, largely as apartments. There's a Tesco's there and an Indian restaurant which opened in 2014. Now, while we're thinking about the massively impressive Art Deco societies, Art Deco style buildings, we can also have a look at cinemas. This is a really key form of entertainment at this point. Almost every suburb would have at least one cinema, and there was plenty in central London. This is the heyday of the cinema, a popular leisure activity. Cinemas were open 7 days a week. They were cheap and entertaining, and it wasn't unusual for people to go several times a week. Now, one of the most ubiquitous chains at the time was the Odeon. It was deliberately designed, their cinemas, to be modern and fashionable, and many of the buildings were designed by Harry Weedham. One of the grandest is the glass-fronted Odeon Leicester Square, which opened in 1937, taking 7 months to build. The opening night show, as we can see here, The Prisoner of Zenda. Weedham created a distinct Odeon style. We can see some of that when we look at the photos of the interiors of them. The thing that strikes me here, we've got that wonderful organ actually, which when not in use descends down to the basement, but we've got those seats that are upholstered in synthetic leopard print, absolutely gorgeous. It's designed to look plush and luxurious, a place of fantasy and escape. However, one of the most prolific designers at the time, cinema designer, is George Coles, who designed 90 in the interwar period, many of which have been converted or demolished. This is his cinema in Bromley, which was refurbished in 2019. This image by Philip Butler in his book Odeon Relics, 1930s Icons in the 21st Century, which is well worth a buy. Now we haven't even talked about eating yet, so we're going to rectify that. Now, there are plenty of options, including ABC and Spears and Pond, but chances are you would end up at a Lyons. The first tea shop of theirs had opened in Piccadilly in 1894. They specialised in quality food for a cheap price in amazing surroundings. By 1910, they had 150 branches, including the famous Lyons corner shops, which first appeared in London in 1909. One of the most famous of these corner houses was the Oxford Street corner house, which you can see here, designed by Oliver Percy Bernard, who was the in-house designer for the entire company. He was really instrumental in moving British tastes away from Victorian conservative style into something much more modern. And we can see some more images of those wonderful ornate interiors here. We can also see something I'm not really going to cover tonight, but ephemera around restaurants and these spaces as well. So we can see some wonderful Art Deco styling in this menu. This is the Vita Sun Cafe at the Coventry Street corner house even. The Vita Sun was on the ground floor. This was Lions experimenting with their design, but also with self-service as well. And this was one of the first self-service cafes, and it opened in 1926. Milk bars were also popular, an American import that arrived in London in the 1930s. They sold milk, but also soups, crackers, and sandwiches. And this is the Sunshine Milk Bar in Bear Street. This is the black and white milk bar along the Gray's Inn Road around about 1937. Now, all of these were offering late night eating and were very popular after the cinema. But to really experience a night out in London, we need to be wealthy. So now we're all wealthy. Congratulations. And we're going to turn to the fashionable set of the 20s and 30s, the bright young people. There were a select band of aristocrats, socialites, artists, and writers, the exact makeup of which changed over time and also who you spoke to. They included people like Stephen Tennant, the younger son of the Earl of Glenconner, Barbara Cartland in the middle, the prolific authoress, 723 books in her career. And at the end, Elizabeth Ponsonby, an aristocrat who seemed to get up to a lot of hijinks with the bright young people. The term itself was used in a story in the Daily Mail in 1924. It was a story about a treasure hunt that had been carried out by a group of wealthy individuals. They scooted around London in their cars on this treasure hunt before ending up having breakfast whilst listening to a band. The Bright Young People group went from treasure hunts into more scandalous activities and parties. This image is from their impersonation party of 1927. These were photographed by the press. There's so much information out there about them. They also had the second childhood party in 1929, where guests arrived in prams and baby carriages. There were also the circus party, the mock wedding party, the tropical party, the PJ and bottle party, and the party without end. Now, these parties were sometimes at venues, but more often than not at their large central London homes. Tallulah Bankhead was well known for her cocktail parties at her Mayfair flat. Apparently, she would often open the door naked and lead guests to the bathroom for cocktails. There were plenty of ways that you could spend your evening in London, but people would go to nightclubs a lot. Now, these three images are from a book called Nights in London by Horace Wyndham, and the images are drawn by Dorothea St. John George, and it was published in 1926. They actually list 26 night spots in this book, but this is three. So we have Murray's River Club, we have Prince's, and we have the Blue Lagoon. I wanted, there were so many night spots that we could, but I was looking specifically for Art Deco style ones. So we have the Cassani's Club, which opened in 1933. It's located at Imperial House, 80 Regent Street, famous to the Café Royal. It was owned by Santos Cassini, who was a successful dance instructor of the time. He had a dance school and also sold the Santos Cassini dance shoe. Cassani's Club was over 2 floors and had dancing every night 9:30 to 3:30. Another image here, the architect is listed as a Gerald Lacoste, but I haven't been able to find too much about it. Now, we also have another wonderful example here, Fisher's on New Bond Street, which opened in 1933, with interiors designed by Raymond McGrath. We also have cocktail bars as well. I'm going to flick through these because I'm aware that I'm going to be over time tonight. But as I said, there's so much we can talk about. Now, in particular, we see buildings that are being, older buildings that are being restyled in 20s and 30s style, architects, interiors, owners responding to these new fashions. So we have places like the public rooms. So we have places like the famous Trocadero on Piccadilly, again, part of the Lions tea room chain. And again, the building is still there. It opened in 1896 and had one of the most exclusive restaurants in Europe. It was known for its famous long bar, but crucially for our point of view tonight, it got a series of makeovers in the 1930s. The most changed room at the Trocadero was this one. It became known as the Salted Almond Bar from 1937. And you can see here this beautiful vermilion red Bakelite veneer of around the bar. Now, as I said, the interior designer for Lions was Oliver Percy Bernard. He is so important here. He was also involved in the refit of the Regent's Palace Hotel, which had originally opened in 1915. That had started to look fairly stuffy, very Edwardian. It And they really wanted to refresh the style as well as install more technological comfort. This is also a point where people are installing modernity as well. Now, one of his first projects there was to transform what had been the billiard room into a new chic, intimate cocktail bar, Shea Cup, which they did in 1934. Um, Now, Shake Up is really the first time that Formica is being used to this extreme in the UK, at least in this public space. Now, I don't have a contemporary colour photo of it, but we can see that there's a Formica on the wall. It was three colours, red, grey, and black, and those strips that are like 1 foot each. That's not 1 foot, but 1 foot wide each. And the gaps filled between them filled with stay bright steel. We have this beautiful brightly coloured geometric pattern chairs and that circular sofa. And the floor as well, we've got that classic Art Deco sunburst motif laid in wooden blocks. These are white beech and red marble. Now, the Regent's Palace was remodeled in the 1960s, and I happened to stay there in 2005 because it was very cheap at the time. But it was very, very rough around its edges by that point. I think it cost around about 20 quid a night. Now, whilst the hotel had carried on the downstairs of the hotel, so it's a massive, massive space. The grill room, restaurant, and Shake Up had become the Atlantic Bar and Grill, a restaurant and two bars from 1994 to 2004, and then was the Astor Bar and Grill until the whole place was actually closed down for redevelopment. And it was a Grade 2 listed building, so it couldn't be destroyed. And as part of this, they kept half of the historic facade. They demolished a lot of the hotel building and turned it into a shop at street level, as well as the wonderful Brasserie Zadel. It's a great place to go and people watch. But the real treasure is underneath, because the underneath is relatively preserved. 4 of the interior rooms were completely restored. 2 were carefully stripped from the building, converted, labelled, and put back. We can see the restaurant space at the top. Now, they had the added problem here, as a lot of these old buildings do, they had to remove the asbestos that was in the ceiling, so the plaster ceilings were actually replicated. But other rooms had to be reconstructed using the original drawings, as none of the interiors had survived. Now, the real star of the show here is the Crazy Cock Cabaret Club space. This was one of the rooms where none of the interiors had survived. Again, I'm not sure when it went. I've got a brochure from 1962 that still shows the Regent Palace Hotel, still shows all the design in situ, although those colourful covered couches had been recovered with red leather. But as I said, this space had to be completely recreated, and again, is an absolutely stunning space, which I would highly recommend you go if you are in London. Now, going back quickly onto our timeline, the Art Deco style was particularly popular in hotel public spaces. We're just going to go through a few more examples here, including the sister site of the Regent's Palace, the Strand Palace on Strand, which had originally opened in 1909 and had undergone major refurbishment in 1928. Again, it's an Oliver Percy Bernard job. He was brought in to do the new foyer. We can see that it had an innovative use of lighting. There was a huge amount of glass, translucent molded glass. We've got mirror glass as well, and lots of chrome steel. You can see in this image the revolving doors at the front of the hotel. And here we can see that molded glass leading upwards. It's worth noting again that whilst these were arguably amazing, in 1968 the owners of the hotel had a redesign. They brought in Dennis Lennon and Partners, who also did the interiors of the QE2. The foyer was dismantled and removed. It was actually rescued by the Victoria and Albert Museum, who kept it in storage until the Art Deco exhibition at the V&A in 2003, where parts of that was recreated. I'd be very interested if any of you actually went to see it. I did. It was the most stunning thing I've ever seen. Absolutely adore it. And it looks a heck of a lot less fancy these days, I have to say. Although I should say they've got the Haxall's restaurant and bar and a gin palace and cocktail bar there as well, which is quite nice. They've also got a menu currently dedicated to their past, including the Oliver Bernard cocktail. Now, another hotel that got an Art Deco makeover was Claridge's, the original hotel dating back to 1812 under a different name. And in 1929, they were using it to showcase some of the best English designers and interior decorators. And we have Oscar P. Milne, who designed the ballroom and the foyer as well. Foyer, stunning glass and glossy black with carpets designed by Marion Dawn. And you can see some more of that wonderful carpet by Dawn here. This is beige and brown colouring, which would complement the peach walls. Again, not always easy to see in black and white, of course. And we have the image, a more colour image of the ballroom here. Now I'm going to quickly leave the section with the Cumberland Hotel just near Marble Arch. Up until last year, it was the Hard Rock Hotel, or 2 years ago, it was the Hard Rock Hotel, but now has been rebranded the Cumberland again. In any case, it was created in the 1930s. Pure Art Deco style. It was built in 1932 and opened in 1933. It had all the hallmarks of modernity, all the technology a hotel could want. Again, it was another Lyons venture, another Oliver Percy Bernard, and you can see a lot of similarities here between that and the Strand Palace. We can see some reception here. Again, this is an image from the 1960s, so we've got an idea of that was all still there until the 1960s, but a bit more of an idea about what that would actually look like. And again, we've got the parlour area as well. So I just wanted to quickly finish off today looking at places where you can go and get the sort of 20s, 30s Art Deco style vibe in London. So we're going to start off with, these are all my favourites, I have to say. Everything's my favourite. I just love all of this. So we've got Bob Ricard near Carnaby Street in Soho. This opened in 2008. It was styled by David Collins Studio, a name that will come up again and again when you look at these Art Deco revivals at this period. People who, interior designers who love the glamour and the luxurious of Art Deco style. Bob Ricard set as an ode to the golden age of traveling, and I think you can really see that from this image with those beautiful blue banquettes, are they called? It's very glamorous. We've got marble tabletops, we've got terrazzo floors, mirrored ceilings, and amazing, amazing chandeliers. We've got this use of colour and glamorous materials, flattering lighting, and odd surprises like the famous press for champagne buttons. As a newer one, is the Hume in Kensington. Now, this is actually in the building of what used to be Barker's of Kensington, so not original Art Deco by any means, but an original Art Deco building. And again, those beautiful, beautiful touches. Now, I keep mentioning Art Deco revivals. That's something I'm particularly interested in, a particular passion of mine. It's worth mentioning that these buildings, Barker's of Kensington, was part of one of the first of the biggest of the Art Deco revivals in the 1970s. When it opened, when the space was used as Big Bieber, I mean, you can't get more Art Deco revival than this. Just absolutely gorgeous. I want to really just emphasize that Art Deco style, as we know, is still very popular. It is still being used in all the modern restaurants and bars in London. It keeps coming back time and time again. Now, this is Claridge's restaurant. This is described as a contemporary take on Art Deco with a contemporary colour palette. We've got marble, brass, mosaic floorings. Now, this was created by Brian O'Sullivan, again, another name that comes up constantly, or Brian O'Sullivan Studios. Their website describes it as a brasserie-style restaurant that references the historical Art Deco features of the hotel while being a contemporary dining destination. The foyer, I'm sort of flicking back through different Art Deco revivals here, but I think it's important to know that to think about Art Deco as being a living, breathing fashion still. The foyer was done over in what was described as a modern Art Deco style in the 1990s, with the centerpiece being this light sculpture that you can just see at the top. In the 90s, again, we have this restoration of the 1929 space, the Fumoir. This is all very sexy, isn't it? It's chrome, leather, and black. It's sexy, it's sophisticated. It's very different from the foyer. It's very different from the restaurant. And a newly opened public Art Deco space in London, which opened in 2023 at the iconic Grade 2 star listed. decommissioned coal-fired power station. This had been started being built in 1929 and completed in 1955. We've got a big gap during the war years. It was decommissioned in 1975 and by 2014 had basically fallen into ruin before being redeveloped into bars, restaurants, office spaces and shops and entertainment spaces as well, including the absolutely gorgeous Control Room B. Now, I don't see, well, if you just look, if you've not been all around the edges of this, there are these wonderful instruments and buttons and things that you just want to climb over the glass wall and start touching. So, pretty much done. And I think I'm still to time. Just about. So we've covered a lot today. We've looked at homes, travel, shopping, including Marks and Spencer's, Pantheon, Bakers and Derry and Tom's. We really can't take any of those for granted. A case in point is Orchard House, the Art Deco Marks and Spencer's we saw earlier. In late 2024, the go-ahead was given for its demolition after a fierce campaign to preserve the building. And of course, there's a huge amount of empty department stores that are also under threat. We're seeing cinemas, cafes, hotels, the majority of which are still surviving in one form or another. And we've talked about some of the places we can get that 20s, 30s feel. There are plenty more as well. The Wolsey, again, the word I cannot say, which in 1921 had been the Wolsey Motor Showroom, is now a fabulous restaurant where so many of those Art Deco features have been preserved. We've got Bibendum, the Beaumont Hotel as well. These are just to name a few. Art Deco styling is really popular still in London and actually only seems to be increasing. I hope with the interest that was also generated by the Art Deco centenary. So I shall be quiet now. Thank you very much for listening. It was a trot through and I'm aware we covered a huge amount, but thank you so much.
Lovely. Thank you, Lucy. We've got one or two questions or comments now. So I'm just going to say if anybody else has any questions for Lucy, just please do pop them in the Q&A box and I'll try and get to them in our last couple of minutes. So a really good question from Andrew Cracknell, which actually I'm curious about as well. And I always have been when I read books that mention Lions coffee houses or Lions restaurants. Is the company that owned Lions restaurants the same Lions as the tea company?
Oh, do you know, I don't know. And I really should because I've got at least 5 books over there. But if we had more time, I'd just get out and I don't know.
I've always assumed it was.
I would imagine so.
I've always assumed it was. That's maybe something we can look up and then we can pop on social media when we find
Yeah.
the answer.
I think there needs to be more talk about that as a company as well. I mean, I've always been really focused on, I had known about the corner shops and I'd known about the tea rooms and stuff. It was only when I started looking at their hotel chains as well. I hadn't realized that they had so many hotels. It's a massive company. Also worth mentioning that they have a fabulous archives at what was the London Metropolitan Archives, but they've changed their names now, haven't they? Absolutely stunning archives. They kept everything. There's ephemera, there's menus, there's photos. It's just beautiful. Someone should get obsessed over it, and then they can answer that question about the tea as well.
Well, apparently Lucy B says there is in fact a really good book on Lion's Legacy by Thomas Harding. So somebody has got obsessed and written a book about it.
Excellent.
There we go. We've got lots of comments saying thank you very much. Interesting. Recommendation to check out the Old Ealing Cinema and the Kensington Cinema, which is soon to reopen. And we've got another comment from Duncan saying it's fabulous. Thank you so much. Good to see so many well-preserved buildings being sympathetically reused, which is, there's some really fabulous. I really want to go and see Bob Ricard. That looks fabulous on my next trip down to London. One question for you, Lucy, is there anywhere in London that you would like to have gone has said that isn't available anymore, either because it's now a private space or because it doesn't exist?
Yes, nightclubs. I'm obsessed with 20s, 30s nightclubs, and they had like a shelf life of 6 months. People would go in, spend tons of money making them look glamorous and gorgeous. Then they'd get raided, closed down, and they'd simply move everything to another building. So there's oh, I'll tell you one place. It's the Silver Slipper, which I think was on Regent Street. I can't quite remember. Yeah, it was Regent Street. And it had an illuminated dance floor in 1926. And I am so obsessed. I mean, I love the 70s. I'm so obsessed with tracking illuminated dance floors and disco balls. They had both of those in the 20s, and the Silver Slipper had these. And I would love to go and dance on the. It's worth saying that they weren't like dance floors from the 70s where it's lit, lit, lit. They're like described as waves of light. Glamorous. So the Silver Slipper, definitely.
That does sound fabulous. Maybe somebody will recreate it for you. Uh,
Oh,
we have
love.
a comment from Helen saying, "Thank you, loved the talk, and she has been to the control room and played with the buttons."
I didn't dare. I think are some of them actually available to play with then? Because all the ones I saw were behind glass. Maybe they just put them up because they don't trust me.
Possibly, that or Helen is very bold.
Yes,
There is that option.
one or the other.
And one or the other. So I think that's us. Let me see. No more questions. So it just remains in the last. Well, we're just out of time, but it just remains for me to say, Lucy, thank you so much for that fantastic talk. Gorgeous pictures as well. And I don't think you need another word. I think wonderful is sufficient because they were wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
We have the following events coming up for booking. So on the 13th of March, we have When Croydon Was the Centre of the Universe, which our presenter will be Will Noble, editor of the popular Londonist website and author of Croydonopolis, A Journey to the Greatest City That Never Was. We also have on the 15th of April, A Curious Obsession, showcasing our Art Deco passions, which is very similar to the one we did in December 2023, our Christmas one, and will be a chance to peek into our members' collections. So both of those are available for booking on the website. And speaking of Croydon, if you would like to go and see a gorgeous Art Deco aerodrome in person, we are of course holding our centenary celebration weekend at the John Lennon Liverpool airport, which used to be Speak Aerodrome. There's going to be talks, there's going to be tours of vintage planes, so please get those booked on the website. They're available for booking at the moment. There's a members discount for the ball. Unfortunately, our members cocktail party, a cocktail hour has sold out, so no more tickets for that. And we have 4 tickets, I think, left for the ball. Ticket sales will have to end at the end of February. So if you are keen, please do get your tickets as soon as you can. We also have an afternoon tea on Sunday afternoon with vintage DJs and dance classes. There will be dance classes throughout the weekend and also some talks on Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning, which will be available to drop on a drop-in basis. You don't have to book for those. But our other events and our tours, the vintage plane tours, and a couple of tours around some sites in Liverpool are all available to book on the website. So Lucy, thank you once again, and we will see you next time.
And hope to see people at the weekend as well. Really looking forward to
Absolutely.
meeting loads of people. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Night.